Hey guys, what's up? Jags Money here, back with some more Project M content, alright? So, last video I made last week was a little bit more, we had a lot of controversiality with that one, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to tone it down a little bit with this one. Not that it's not going to be controversial, but it's going to be a little on the lighter side in terms of that it's not like a huge, prominent discussion at the moment where people are getting heated, throwing fists on Twitter, you know? So, this one, I saw a post on Twitter, not by anyone in the PM community, mind you, but just a post on Twitter, somebody just getting upset about how people misuse tier lists, right? And they kind of were putting blame on tier lists and that, not saying they shouldn't exist, but saying that they're not useful. And that made me think, you know what, this needs to be corrected. All right, we need to go over why tier lists exist, what's going on with those, why they're still around, why people use them, why people use them poorly, all that good stuff. Thought it was important to go over. Thank you whoever was on Twitter that made me do this. But to go into this, first thing we're going to go over is what even is like a tier list in its own definition, right? So according to Wikipedia, I know, best source ever, a tier list is a list of playable characters or any elements in a video game subjectively ranked by their prospective viability in high-level competitive settings in that game, right? And I think most of us, if you're in the community already, kind of understand that to some degree, but there's a few key words in there that we're going to be going over later in the video that are in that definition that kind of show you kind of what it means, okay? So, first thing I want to go over in terms of my general points here is what even does a tier list represent? What does it mean other than just how good you think certain characters are? Why are they in that order, right? Well, first thing is, right off the bat, tier lists are basically a simplified or a generalized version of what's called the matchup spread. And the matchup spread is just a giant, think of it as like a giant chart where every character is on the x-axis and every character is going down the y-axis, and every time a character crosses another one, that right there is their matchup against each other, where one character is going to be favored, one character is going to be disadvantaged, or they're going to be even, right? And there's a certain level of how bad it is or how good it is or if it's even, right? That giant chart is what is being simplified in the tier list, right? Characters with a lot of good matchups against the majority of the important matchups are going to be higher on the tier list. And same with a lot of characters that have like a lot of even matchups, but it skews a little in their favor, they're going to be up there as well. And then characters who have poor matchups, and especially poor matchups against the more represented, more important characters, or they have a lot of even matchups that skew downward, those characters are going to end up generally on the lower end of the tier list, correct? So, that is generally what it means. That is very objectively kind of what they are, in a sense, right? That's how people think of them. Now, some other things that make up tier lists, right? Now, no tier list is only one of these things. They are a combination of all of these things put together, and it depends on whoever it is that is putting more importance in one or the other. The next thing that they are is a representation of results at tournaments and events, right? Characters that win a lot are going to go up the tier list from maybe if they weren't winning as much, right? That doesn't mean that only winning characters are top tiers, but it means that characters will move up and down and will have their opinions changed if they get results at tournaments, right? Most people can agree on that as well. The next thing is the analyzation of their strengths of their toolkit, right? So every character has a toolkit, and you can understand what that is. Regardless of results, you can look at their tools, and you can make an idea of if that toolkit is good or not, right? For instance, some characters can have mediocre to decent results and still be super, super top tier if everyone agrees that that character has crazy, crazy tools that are hard to deal with and oppressive, such as Meta Knight, right? Meta Knight does not share the same results pages as the other characters up there, like Mewtwo and Wolf, who have won majors and who have shown through their mains that those characters can win majors. But everyone knows that Meta Knight can do it. Why? Because his toolkit is amazing. He has one of the best kits in the game, and regardless of if he wins or not, everyone knows it, right? Or the community agrees that that is the case, right? So, that is another point that's brought in. And the last thing that is usually something that people usually don't use too much in their lists is future strength as the game develops in its meta, right? Characters that people can say, this character hasn't really been explored right now, but in the future, that character is going to become a problem, right? Take a look at, I know patches have come into play here, so, cut me some slack, but a character like Zero Suit Samus wasn't getting a ton of respect a few years ago, but now everybody's afraid of that character. Some of the top players I've spoken to think that character might even be top 1, debatably in the top 3 with Mewtwo, Meta Knight, and Wolf. So that is another thing that, people can put things on the tier list and say, this character is higher up than maybe they are right now, but I'm only doing that because I think that they have the potential to be up in the tier list, right? So that is what a tier list represents. What it represents a combination of all of those things, right? But the generalization is that it is a simplified, easier to read version of the giant matchup spread, right? And characters are put into tiers based on their matchups, right? In general. Now, I want to go over the problems with the tier list because that's the point of the video, is to answer that tweet I saw where the person had problems with tier lists, right? And the big problem is how they're interpreted, right? So, as I said before, tier lists are generalized and simplified versions of the matchup spread. And there's a lot of nuance of why characters are actually top tiered. And that gets muddled in the tier list, right? For instance, there's characters in a lot of games that have a very volatile matchup spread. And what I mean by that is they're not a character that has a lot of even matchups compared to the rest of the cast. They definitely have some even ones for sure. But they have less of those. They have a lot more ones that they win, and they have a lot more ones that they lose. And that's just because of their toolkit giving them a very volatile playstyle. That they have certain things that will dominate some of the cast and then lose to the other half of the cast, and there really isn't a lot of in between. And the biggest example I can think of that most people would agree with is Ike. Ike has huge range, huge disjoint, and he's got a lot of burst movement. If your character can't deal with those things, you're going to struggle really hard with Ike. But if your character is faster than Ike, has moves you can react to his burst movement with, can maybe even match his disjoint, or can edge guard him effectively, because edge guarding Ike kind of comes down to a 50-50 whether your character can even do it or not, respectively. But that is why, and then those characters will succeed against Ike really hard and they'll win. So Ike ends up being a character who has a lot of matchups where he stomps, and then a lot of matchups where he gets stomped, figuratively speaking. He can play against most matchups fairly fine, and other characters can play against him fairly fine. But we're talking about in the grand scheme of things here. He's a character with a lot of ups and downs. And because of that, it's just kind of where you skew him. Most people skew him upwards. They think that the pros outweigh the cons, even though he definitely has both. So it just kind of comes down to that. And that nuance kind of gets muddled if you just look at the tier list from an outside perspective. You just go, oh, Ike is good. Here's the tier list. He is here. He must be good. And then you might play a matchup or two and go, man, I am struggling really hard. And if you don't know why he's up there in terms of how the matchup spread is interpreted, you're going to be very confused, because the tier list gives you one thing and then you're experiencing another thing, right? So that's a problem with the tier list that a lot of people get when they read a tier list off the bat, right? A lot of new players or a lot of people watching the game from the outside in, right? Last thing, tier lists, they're meant to be informative, right? They're meant to spread what the meta is to everyone, right? At least in that person's perspective. But it ends up creating a circular pattern, and I've seen people describe this a little bit, where characters that are put lower on the tier list for whatever reason, or are agreed to be mediocre characters or just bad characters, people pick up the game and they want to play them less because they don't want to play a weak character. They don't want to put in a lot of time onto a character that isn't going to get them very far. This results in that character getting less development as the meta goes on, which in turn lowers their results even more because they're not getting the same development as all the other better characters. And that makes them even worse and even worse. It's just cyclical, right? And that's a big problem with tier lists as well, that people using tier lists to decide on their character or decide who they want to play will end up causing this problem, right? And this isn't a fault of any particular person. This is just kind of how people understand tier lists, right? They want to put in time into a character that will allow them to succeed with their toolkits, and they don't want to put in time to characters who will not reward them for their effort, right? So, how should we be using a tier list then? Okay, that's the last thing. Well, first of all, your character should be picked based on your enjoyment of the character and not based on the tier list, obviously. Especially if you plan on playing the game for a long time. If you're just playing the game because you want to win and you just pick a good character who you may or may not even enjoy that much, your enjoyment of the game is going to degrade the longer you play it. You want to play a character that gives you the enjoyment regardless of how good they are, so that you can keep exploring and pushing that character and getting better while enjoying the game at the same time. I think most people will tell you this, especially in PM, where every character can be pushed to a very, very good level. This isn't Melee. This isn't another fighting game that has really overpowered top tiers and really underpowered low tiers. This is a very muddled game where a lot of characters are pretty close to the balance standpoint, right? Now, the next thing is, don't assume that a high tier character beats your character. Like I said, tier lists are a simplified version of the matchup spread. Let's put up a very good example. A lot of Meta Knight players have a really hard time with Mario. His fireballs can't be clanked with any of your moves, really. And he punishes you extremely hard, extremely easily, and he has a tough time being edge guarded, which Meta Knight really usually succeeds at. So Mario gives him a really hard time. If you just look at the tier list, though, you'd see that Mario is a decent character, And you would think that Meta Knight should stomp him, as Meta Knight's considered by everyone to be top 3 or 4. But that's not the case. A lot of Meta Knights don't really like the matchup because it's very difficult for them to deal with fireballs and to deal with Mario's super crazy punish game on Meta Knight. Not that Meta Knight can't play it, he is a great character, but it's just really, really tough. And if you looked at the tier list, you wouldn't understand that. So really, if you're getting into the game, looking at the tier list for a generalized version of which characters end up stronger or weaker is fine, but don't use them as a basis for what matchups what your matchup ideas should be, right? Really look into it, ask people, look for a matchup chart, something like that to get a better understanding of the matchup that you're struggling with or asking about, right? And next is, no tier list is objectively correct, right? I think most of us can understand why. Every tier list is usually a single person or a combination of subjective opinions from members of the community, right? See what opinions are well agreed upon, or see who the tier list is created by to see if that's something you want to kind of use your judgment on, right? See if that's something you want to say, this is our tier list, or this is the tier list I agree with, or this is the, if you're showing a tier list to someone, make sure that you go, I respect these people's opinions, this is what they think, and I agree with them for these reasons, and that is when you should be making a judgment on that. Don't, make sure you understand whose tier list it is, what kind of biases they may have, what region they play in. All of that stuff will affect a tier list's output, right? And last thing I want to say to go out on this one is that remember this, guys, just because a tier list is used in a poor way by someone doesn't mean tier lists are a tool that are poorly made, right? They're meant to simplify the game's meta down to an understandable metric that people in the game and outside the game can glance at and they can understand, right? And specifically for people on the outside the game, they can use to understand why they're seeing certain things or why they're seeing a lot of something, right? They can use that at a glance to figure that out, right? And then if they're watching a tournament, hopefully the commentators will give them a more nuanced understanding of that specific matchup and how it works, right? So the tier list can still be used in an informative way, right? Make sure you guys are using tier lists correctly, or else you're going to fall for those traps, okay? And that's about all there is to it for this one, guys. Thanks for sticking by for the tier list discussion. I know it wasn't as dramatic as the last one, but if you have any takes or have any ideas or have anything to add, please leave it in the comments of wherever you're seeing this video. I post it everywhere, so, let everyone hear what you're saying. I'll take a look at everything. I usually try to answer everyone's comments, or at least kind of give you a thumbs up if I agree or disagree. I know I got stuff to do, but, I try to get everywhere. I try to answer everybody and see what everyone's saying, right? But thank you guys for tuning in once again. This has been Jags Money for some more PM content. I'll try to be back next week for some more. Leave a like on Twitter, subscribe, upvote on Reddit, wherever the hell you're watching this, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.